I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the August 7th, 2025 Land Use and Natural Resources Committee meeting. We'll start with a pledge. Director Maple, if you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Could the clerk please call roll?
Yes, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bradford, absent. Buhan.
Here.
Arquette.
Here.
Maple. Teeter.
Here.
Villegas.
Here.
Vice Chair Hume.
Here.
Vice Chair Kozlowski.
Here.
Chair Baines.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Moving on to public communications. This is a time for anyone who wishes to address this board on an item that does not appear elsewhere on this agenda. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment?
There's no public comment.
How about online?
Nobody online either.
Okay, perfect. All right, so now we have the last bit of housekeeping before we get to the main agenda. It's disclosures. This is time for any director to disclose any conflicts of interest on items on the agenda. Anybody have any conflicts? Seeing none, we'll now take up the consent calendar. Okay, this is, is there a public comment who wishes to remove an item from?
There's no public comment on this item.
All right.
Yep.
Any from the board wish to remove any item? Okay, so looking for a motion and a second for the consent calendar.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
We can do an all in favor vote.
Okay, that's great. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. I will now move on to the information section of the agenda. The next information item is identified as, securing new funding source for Green Means Go. Dov Caden, SACOG staff, present the item.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Dov Caden. I'm the program manager for Green Means Go. For those who weren't able to make it, we just had a fantastic conversation at our board luncheon, kind of running through some of the history of this program and what we've been working on since 2020 when we created Green Means Go as a program out of our 2020 long range plan, our MTP SCS. This item today is an information item. It's to discuss really for the first time what is next for this program and specifically how we can fund Green Means Go moving forward. We're at a bit of an inflection point, as we'll get into a little bit later. So this is really a good time for us to kind of take stock of how we want to approach our next steps. I want to be very clear up front that this is intended to be an exploration really of all of the options. And this is not a staff recommendation or of any particular path. We're going to be seeking input from a variety of stakeholders over the coming months, including everyone from local jurisdiction staff, other governmental agencies, partner agencies, community-based organizations, advocacy groups, of course, the development community. This is really just our first opportunity to hear from you, but it will not be our last. We're going to be coming back to discuss what we've learned from all of that outreach. So just kind of keep that in mind as I'm going through. These are not fully baked ideas yet. We just kind of want to hear your initial thoughts and what you're interested in learning more about and who you want us to talk to. So I won't, bore the folks who are able to make the luncheon, with the full overview, but I think it is just kind of worth reinforcing here what Green Means Go is. And I think the easiest way to think about this program is that this is SACOG's implementation program for infill housing. There's ambitious but achievable local plans from across the region, really, about revitalizing infill areas, from transit station areas, downtowns, suburban commercial corridors, rural main streets, with new housing. And that new housing is really critical, of course, at the local level, but also at the regional level for achieving some of the regional goals that we have as an agency, especially around the greenhouse gas emissions target, but also just kind of our triple bottom line goals. Simultaneously, housing and housing affordability, and you can maybe group homelessness in there, is really the number one issue that we heard as part of all of our outreach efforts as part of the plan update. I'm sure many of you have probably heard similar feedback from your constituents as well. And so Green Means Go is kind of the region's collective effort and attempts to create new housing and infill areas with this emphasis in product type diversity and in affordability. And we do that through a few things, right? We have this multi-pronged strategy that's first aimed at kind of providing technical assistance, right, and policy reform work around, what are the meaningful things we can do to kind of address these barriers at the local level, funding for those policy reforms and planning work, and targeted infrastructure investments that reduce costs to developers and stimulate development that way. So this program has had a lot of success securing state and federal funding over the last few years. We got 60 million actually of funding across 4 different sources that we've then sub-allocated down to the local level. We did provide a full list of all 75 of those grants that we have awarded through this program as attachment A in your staff reports. So you can kind of take a look at that to kind of see what's going on in your jurisdiction. This program is geographically focused as well. It has, is focused on funding projects in green zones. These are locally nominated by jurisdictions. So these areas are totally, the areas are defined at the local level. And these are places where there's a lot of plans for local new growth. And the short of it is that, we've seen a dramatic uptick in completed housing permits in green zones since the inception of this program about 5 years ago. And so just to put a couple numbers to that, total housing permits in the region over that 5-year period, up 50%. Housing in green zones up over 300%. Over 3/4 of those green zone permits in 2024 were attached housing units. So these are kind of like units with shared walls, right? So townhomes, duplexes, multifamily. Regionally, we saw the highest number of attached housing units in 2024 that we have seen on record, multi-decade highs on that stat. And 2/3 of those units happen in green zones. So there's a lot to be proud of for what the region has accomplished on this. However, even with all of that tremendous progress, we're still just shy of the ambitious goals that we set for ourselves as part of the 2025 blueprint for housing in green zones over that same time period. So more work to do, I guess, is the takeaway there. We want to kind of continue that trajectory upward. In terms of what's next, this is the suite of activities that we've outlined as part of the luncheon. I'm not going to go into all of these, right? But we're going to obviously continue to really kind of focus on the grants that we have today. We want to deliver those. We want to continue to do our technical assistance, our advocacy at the state and federal level. The focus of the conversation today is really on that second bucket. And that's all about kind of finding and identifying a new source of funding for Green Means Go. I mentioned at the front there that this is a little bit of an inflection point for this program. We're 5 years now into the program. We've had a lot of success attracting outside funding, to a certain extent, translating that funding into, new housing units and outcomes. But there's this general sense that the funding strategy that we have employed so far is not going to get it done over the next 5 years. I'm getting back here to our existing funding. We've completed now the REAP 1 and the Strategic Growth Council early activation grants. That money is all spent. We're making our way through REAP 2. That money is going to be fully spent next year. RCN is just getting started now, but those are all one-time funding sources. And we, frequently will get questions from, your local staff, from developers about when's the next round of Green Means Go funding coming. And I think the unfortunate answer is that we've awarded all the money that we've secured. And we do not actually have really any like high probability prospects in the next few years. And that's because, a familiar story that you're probably dealing with at the local level too, right? Like federal priorities have shifted in this administration. The budget outlook for the state is not looking good for the next couple of years. All of our state funding so far has come as one-time grants during budget surpluses, right? So we have to be, I think, open to the possibility here that we're not going to be able to attract grant funding to this program in the next few years. And given that reality, if the region wants to continue the momentum of this program, we have to kind of get creative. And that's why we do have this policy in the 2025 blueprint. It's called Policy Vibrant 2, and that's to identify and secure stable sources of funding and financing to continue the momentum of Green Means Go and accelerate the construction of a range of housing options that are affordable in low VMT parts of the region. So this is, I think, obviously we haven't adopted the blueprint yet, but I think we want to get a jump on this conversation. And this is our first foray into implementing that policy. we're trying to lay out the universe of strategies that could fund this program moving forward. And the staff report lays out these four different, big bucket kind of strategies, which I'll go over one at a time here. Again, these are not, fully fleshed out yet. They're just kind of trying to cover all of the bases just to get this conversation started. So I'll start with that first one, which is to continue to pursue state and federal funding. And this is really a continuation of our current strategy. I think that's the best way to think about this, which is, we're going to apply for grants when they arise. We're going to advocate for new state and federal grant opportunities. Again, we don't anticipate that there's going to be as many of these grants in the next few years, but we're trying to get creative and proactive about kind of advocating for those new funding sources at both levels of government. So, for example, our legislative staff is working on incorporating Green Means Go eligible activities into the Statewide Housing Bond Act of 2026, which is kind of making its way through the legislature right now. But if that's passed, that would go to the voters in 2026. We're also working on incorporating Green Means Go activities into the extension of California's cap and trade system and renewal. At the federal level, we continue to advocate for Green Means Go activities as part of, there's a process going on to kind of reauthorize the Surface Transportation Act that kicked off this spring. We're going to be, I think it's decided next year is what we're looking at. And so obviously we're working on that. We're continuing to work with our partners to advocate for more flexibility with some of that federal transportation funding so that, we can direct more of that money potentially to the types of infrastructure investments that we do fund through Green Means Go. But I think, again, just to be realistic, this approach does have a bit of like a lower probability, I think, of new funding in the immediate future. The next three ideas are more of sort of newer ideas. So the next one is incentivizing using existing SACOG funding. And as I mentioned before, right, SACOG or Green Means Go does not currently use any of our existing SACOG funding towards this program. This has been all about, state and federal funding from grants. And in the absence of those grants, we could look at directing existing SACOG funding towards Green Means Go. And we have a little bit of a track record of doing this, of sort of layering these investments in these priority areas like green zones. Just as an example of that, the city of Marysville and SACOG worked together to kind of layer multiple funding sources. So we brought out a consultant, to downtown to do kind of economic development work with some of the downtown businesses. We awarded them a 2023 funding round for the historic downtown Marysville safety and walkability enhancements project. And then, of course, we've awarded several Green Means Go grants, I think 4 grants in downtown Marysville for kind of green zone planning and infrastructure investments. So we're kind of doing this a little bit to a certain extent, but I think, the idea here would be we could continue to explore, being creative about other ways that we could use our funding to kind of support green zones. I think we fully recognize that, these are existing programs that are oversubscribed, right? And, trying to meet multiple competing priorities. Of course, the board just went through a long process to kind of reimagine how we're managing new funding in 2026. So we want to, of course, see that play out before we make any, big changes to that. But so given that, we're probably in this category talking more in the mid to long term as well, maybe 2028-ish. The third category is to pursue new revenue. So the closest analog to this, I guess, would be the Bay Area underwent a process in 2019 to actually create a new entity called the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, or BAFA. And that entity is essentially gives them the ability to kind of raise and allocate housing funds. And that new authority they're administering some of the Bay Area's REAP funds that we used, but they're also contemplating a bond measure. They're a pretty substantial bond measure, actually. I think a $10 to $20 billion regional bond initiative is being contemplated for 2028 out there to fund affordable housing production, preservation, and infrastructure. So that's obviously an ambitious endeavor that's much larger than Green Means Go, but it's something that SACOG could look into as part of funding Green Means Go related projects. Again, more on the longer term trajectory on that one as well. A lot of things need to be set up. In the Bay Area's case, that entity required state enabling legislation, right? So there's going to be a bit of a lag before we could stand something like that. And then the final category. So this is to explore a regional VMT mitigation program. All right, so this gets a little bit complicated, so bear with me on this one. It is worth providing a little bit of background first. So this is all kind of based around a piece of legislation that was passed back in 2013 called SB 743. And basically that bill says that when new transportation and land use projects are kind of completing their environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, you have to evaluate the extent to which the project is increasing total driving. And they measure that with a metric called vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. It's a metric that we're familiar with probably on this board. It's one that we deal with quite a bit. And essentially, if the project is found to increase VMT above a certain threshold, so think, highway projects, road widenings, maybe some land use projects that are kind of more in a greenfield context, you're required under CEQA to what's called mitigate that VMT through measures that reduce or offset that VMT. The standard practice for the last few years, at least since 2018, is for the project's applicant, be it Caltrans for highways, local governments for new roads, the developer in the case of the greenfield developments, is to seek their own mitigation, right? They're kind of on their own to kind of essentially sometimes cold call and try to find folks who are willing to take money to mitigate projects. And this has kind of led to, you can imagine, a somewhat like haphazard and uncoordinated set of mitigations, as it's understandably a very difficult position for all of these actors to kind of harmonize these mitigations in a strategic way. And in many ways, it has presented itself as a barrier to delivering transportation projects, as I'm sure many of your public works staff or Caltrans District 3 can attest to. There are two basic ways that folks can mitigate their VMT if they're looking outside of the project. So the first is through, you can fund transit projects or kind of like transportation demand management, it's called, projects, like employer-based carpooling programs, for example. And then the other is through funding housing in low VMT areas and kind of making it possible for more people to live in places where you don't have to drive as much, right? And one of the hardest parts of this process on project sponsors is finding the mitigations, and in addition to finding them, feeling comfortable on the calculation for how much that project is actually going to reduce VMT, and feeling comfortable with that calculation in a court of law, right? Because a lot of these projects do end up getting sued because we're talking about CEQA. Okay, so fast forward to this summer, and as part of the now passed governor's budget trailer bill, in fact, it's the same, we were talking about this bill earlier in the luncheon, it's the same bill that provided a number of these really significant CEQA reforms that exempt infill housing from CEQA entirely. The state established what they call the statewide VMT mitigation bank. And essentially, the bank is setting a price for VMT, and it's allowing projects that are seeking mitigation to pay a fee into a statewide program that's then funding affordable housing in low VMT parts of the state. So think of it like an optional fee out program for projects to comply with CEQA under this law. And it has a very aggressive timeline. This is going to be up and running per statute in June of next year. So come July, projects can pay into this bank. And while a version of the language that was signed, into law is actually better than it used to be. For example, an earlier iteration of that bill restricted what we could, the affordable housing projects that could be, the money could send to just be within a quarter mile of light rail, which is extremely restrictive. Obviously, it doesn't really work for our region. Fortunately, that language was removed, but there is still, I think, this challenge with the statewide bank, which is that there is built into the legislation, there is the ability for money to go into the bank from our region and go to a different part of the state. It can be redistributed. In particular, if there aren't enough kind of viable projects that kind of conform to the guidelines that the state is creating. And that's, I think, a very concerning, yes.
So are you getting to the point that
Not quite. Not quite. I'll yeah, I think, there's probably a Venn diagram there, and there's maybe a small kind of subset in the middle. But I think what our concern with that bank is, number one, we could lose out on money. We don't want money to leak out, right? And we also want probably a little bit more flexibility. So I'll get to that in a second for what the remedy could be. Yeah, so the way that it's set up is, correct. That is correct. Yeah. In an optional way, right? Not required, but they would have the option to do so. So I think getting to the point, given the risk that the region could potentially see mitigations redistributed, SACOG could actually create an optional regional VMT mitigation strategy ourselves, right, to fund Green Means Go projects. And I think the idea there would be we could ensure that the region always has enough viable VMT mitigations such that we never see funding sent to other parts of the state. And it could fund similar things as a state program, but it would actually, I think, have the added benefit of, regional control, I guess, over the types of projects that it funds, right? We could create more flexibility for what gets funded as part of a program. It would also provide, I think, a service to member agencies and to project sponsors who may or may not want the responsibility of actually identifying and securing their own mitigations for projects, which in a way can reduce, litigation risk and kind of help with project delivery. So I'll go back to this slide here, and just to kind of sum up that option, SACOG could explore a regional VMT mitigation strategy similar to the state, but on our own terms, ensuring that we don't lose money to other parts of the region, reducing that VMT calculation burden and risk for local jurisdictions, and improving project delivery, and hopefully helping to kind of coordinate resources towards the most effective projects. I know that was a ton of information, but I'll end my presentation there and would love to kind of hear your initial thoughts on all of these ideas and strategies. What's speaking to you? What do you want to learn more about? Who do you want us to talk to?
All right. I guess first of all, is there anybody from the public wish to comment on this item? Oh, sorry. Anybody from the public wish to make a comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
So we'll bring it back to the board. Are there any questions or comments at this
I
time?
have one other one.
Before.
So what would be the vehicle for creating a regional program? Do we need a piece of state legislation? Do we need a MOU of some sort amongst all the jurisdictions? And who's going to actually be the bank?
Yeah. So first off, there's several ways you can set up a program. A bank is one of them. And so we have seen
Like a banking institution?
No,
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Practically, who's going to hold the money that gets put into this?
Right. It's a good question. Yeah. So there's been a few. So everyone who's kind of doing their job on this idea across the state is exploring an idea like this. There's been a lot of, folks who have explored this. There's now 2 or 3 active programs across the state. One in Western Riverside, COG, who has set one up. They have a slightly different model than a bank. It's an exchange. We can kind of get into the differences there, maybe now or maybe in a future presentation. There's also LA Metro, who's created a bank. City of, at the local level, City of San Diego has created one. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. The bank option, it's not a bank in a legal formal sense of that word. It is really just essentially an account where money can pool. And so that does not require state enabling legislation to do. That is something that can be done right now through a decision-making process like SACOG, or at a county level or at a local level.
So in your capacity as an advisor to the board of SACOG, what is your suggestion in terms of a format for a program like that in our region? Individual jurisdictions or a composite MOU, a piece of state enabling legislation to create yet another agency to be the holder and distributor of this, an expansion of STA or
I don't think we
other
know.
agencies?
I don't think we know, right? I think, I'm,
Please.
don't put words in your mouth. If you have advice, let us know now. But look,
It's a
and we,
promising idea. That's why I'm asking this.
well, and look, we recognize, we've got STA here in the audience, is talking about Transportation Authority, and we sat down with Kevin last week to talk through, because they're looking at a countywide, potential countywide bank. We've met with a number of local governments around the region who frankly have been thinking about how we're going to actually handle, should we set up our own VMT mitigation bank? We talked to Caltrans and had a very good conversation over this week about the projects they're going to have to mitigate around the region. So I think it's the reason we wanted to bring this to you now as an exploration. A is because the state's going to create one. And B, because we wanted to begin an exploration, start getting your feedback on this early. So,
Will the state's created program preclude Caltrans from making a choice of other mitigation, or will they just have to pay into that?
I'll speak to that for now, but there's nothing certain for what's going to happen yet. We're still waiting on direction from headquarters. The June 2026 date has been cited by our headquarters folks. There's working groups just like this one here that we're working on through headquarters. So as I get more information, I'll be passing that on to James and this forum and the committees. So this is still very early stages for us. So we are not sure if we can even participate in a regional forum or if we have to go through the statewide forum, but we are definitely interested in looking at what's best for the region and where we can keep the money to be used more effectively.
Well, we can undercut the state by setting our rate a little bit lower.
Basically, we
so
want to
question-
deliver our projects as soon as possible. So if whatever gives us the more flexibility, we want to go there. But as to what Caltrans is going to say in headquarters and what statewide direction is going to be, that's waiting to be seen.
Thank you.
I'm curious, as we were working with the state, I think it says that SACOG was in there trying to help with language and that type of thing, and I'm sure that we brought this issue up, I'm guessing. What was the pushback? Can you give us a little feedback on how we got to that point?
Yeah, yeah, so they decided to use an existing pot of money instead of create a new one. So it's sort of this defunct fund at HCD called the TUD Implementation Fund that they are sending money towards and then are going to administer this new bank. Believe it or not, they were not even really aware of what the statutory limitations were on that fund. And so we did sort of push. We were first very concerned about the geographic limitations of the original legislation that would have just, again, restricted the housing to be a 4th mile within light rail, a tiny part of a 6-county region for us. And so we really wanted to make sure that we had flexibility to fund more than that. Fortunately, we do. We also brought up this kind of concern, I think, about money spilling from the region. They, have some language in there that prioritizes. There's sort of a cascading list of priority for where money can be spent. And the first priority is, to be spent within region. But they were not amenable in that process to more strict limitations around that. And so they do have pretty clearly in the statute the ability to send it outside the region. They added this kind of like, provided it is within an adjacent region or within a certain proximity. But I think, if they're going to be awarding funding based off of, the efficiency of the mitigation, I think we should be concerned about the potential for affordable housing funding to be sent to the Bay Area, because that's an adjacent region that has very efficient VMT mitigations.
What agency is the they in that story?
Yeah, so it's a complicated web. So the legislation requires LCI, which is the Land Use and Climate and Innovation, used to be called the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, to create the guidelines for the state program. So they are the primary folks who are kind of working on creating the kind of like, yes, the bank itself and kind of the criteria. Then the other actor in all of this is HCD, the State Housing Department. That's where the money will actually be sent. And then when they go through a process of awarding projects, it'll be through HCD. So there would be a call for projects, and then you'd be going through the standard agreement process at HCD and kind of all of that, which is, a little bit more, has some strings attached and some admin fees associated with it. Yeah.
Can you use the microphone?
Katie's got.
whatever's getting ready to be passed, there's no clear formula on how the money is gonna be spent or, making sure that everything's fair. It's sort of vague. Is that what you're?
Yeah, so there's two components. There's the statutory limitations and then there's a guidelines process. And so the statute is in ink. It's very of course, they could change the statute, but that would require a legislative process. And that's really, what SACOG had engaged on, just to like ensure flexibility. But then even after that, there's a whole set of decisions that need to be made through the guidelines process, both through LCI and HCD. So that's going to be occurring between now and next June.
Okay. Director Maple?
One question I have is, what are some of the types of projects that can be funded under a model like this? So is it just transportation specific, or are we looking at like a broader range of?
Right, so the state program is very prescriptive, and has a very specific type of 100% affordable housing projects that they want to fund. It is through HCD. Part of the advantage of developing our own program is that we can co-create the eligible activities with local jurisdiction staff, right? Obviously, if we're talking about, housing this program within the umbrella of Green Means Go, and using that framing, I think, there's going to be a land use and housing component to that. But that is not limiting the scope of whatever program we do just to that. I think the idea would be we could include transportation projects too. Of course, a lot of transportation projects are connected to land use, right? And they're creating demand for new infill by making these places more livable and comfortable, right? Especially if it's a safety improvement. But transit improvements, things like that, that's all fair game. One caveat I guess I would just mention is that Green Means Go so far has been very expansive in what it funds, including on the planning side, studies, infrastructure studies, things like that. As soon as you start talking CEQA, right, there needs to be this very clear, much more clear nexus between what you're paying for and how you're reducing VMT so that you can feel comfortable in a legal standpoint. So I think it's more likely that a program like this is going to fund capital projects than planning projects for that reason. It's not impossible, but I think that's, so I think we're more talking housing projects, housing related infrastructure, transportation capital projects, potentially, transit related projects. Yeah.
That's helpful. Well, Chair, my preference, just hearing all this conversation is I think it's worthy of more discussion. I think we don't know yet what it's gonna look like, so I think it's worth exploring what it could look like. What are some other jurisdictions are doing? I know that you mentioned a few, I didn't notice that. But I think it'd be a good idea for us to at least have the conversation, maybe have staff work on it, have that at a future meeting to talk more, give us some recommendations, and help us make better decisions. And then I'm just really, really interested in.
Director Maple, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Is your mic on?
Do you want me to repeat everything I just said? Thank you. And I'm also really particularly interested in the flexibility piece. So if we can, obviously I think we're all collectively interested in ways that we can find to build more infill housing, to housing in general, transportation projects, the things that we talk about all the time. And we know that, unfortunately, as we look at the state budget outlook, it may not be the case that we always have grants available for those things. And so interested in exploring, don't know what it could be, but would definitely like to hear from staff at a future meeting what those options are. Thank you.
Great. Director Villegas?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's very intriguing. I would agree. And it's not necessarily the case that we'd have to reinvent the wheel. Not that long ago, environmental restoration, state and federal endangered species required development to offset by buying land. So it was a similar program. It's not completely unlike this. And then municipalities were forced to design sort of habitat conservation plans, where if you were developing, depending on your mitigation ordinances, if you were developing 1 acre, you had to offset a certain percentage by buying, land that actually preserved the species that were either endangered, federal or state, or whatever the case would be. For some developers that were smaller and trying to be more nimble, the notion of trying to go out and find land that was meeting all the state and federal requirements was an absolute deal killer nightmare. Consequently, municipalities decided to develop, maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, you guys already know this, the Habitat Conservation Plan, eventually the Natural Communities Conservation Plan in YOLO, by design was designed to allow development to occur in the urbanizing cities within the county so that places like West Sacramento could keep doing what they wanted to do and include an in lieu fee that allowed us to develop at a rate that we wanted to. Conversely, other municipalities who didn't want to grow, they could go through the process of securing that land, that 1-to-1 mitigation, 1-to-2, 1-to-3, whatever case it's going to be, depending on where they were developing. And over the course of establishing the Joint Powers Authority to administer and manage this operation, it actually worked pretty well. It allowed everybody to do what they wanted to do within their respective jurisdictions, but it had one organization sort of as the holding bank for the credits, the offsets. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's another example of an opportunity. Here we are just many years later.
Yeah, and if I may, I think I would just emphasize, right, we're talking about fee programs in that case, which is, and there are ways to set up fee programs, and I think a couple local jurisdictions have expressed an interest in doing some sort of VMT fee program, which is, it's a fee, so it's mandatory, right? What we're talking about today, if the board, chooses to pursue this as an idea, is a completely optional thing, right? Like we are not, taking away in any way agency on the part of the project sponsor, be it the local government or Caltrans or whoever it is who's using the bank to kind of pursue mitigations in their own way or have conditions of approval around, where that mitigations are spent. What we're, trying to do is provide options to kind of, take that burden off of the project sponsor if they do not want that responsibility. Yeah.
Okay. Director Hume?
Thank you, Chair. Dov, I apologize. I should have asked this question during the lunch session, but I didn't, so I'll ask now. Certainly it's complementary to our efforts, but there's nothing particularly about this program that is a mandate of either the COG or the MPO functions. Is that an
Correct.
accurate statement?
Yep.
And so what we did talk about at the lunch session is that it's kind of an interesting situation in whereas the existence of this program creates the attractive environment that attracts the funding that makes this program self-sustaining and not pulling money out of those things that are mandated functions of a COG and an MPO. And so the one thing that concerns me about moving forward on this is the top right box there of using existing SACOG funding. Certainly in recent days, months, maybe even years, Sacramento County as a geography and STA and RT as agencies have been kind of in a heightened level of scrutiny to make sure that transportation dollars go to transportation projects. And so as we move forward with this, because it sounds like there is certainly committee consensus to want to move forward with this, I would like to have a couple of things taken into consideration. And the first is that we don't end up a mile wide and an inch deep, where the money is being spread so thinly that we aren't able to actually accomplish anything meaningful and tangible. And then the second thing is, and I think, James, you brought this up, is to not duplicate efforts that are being done at the local agency, particularly efforts that STA is pursuing for a countywide VMT strategy. And then furthermore, as we look at self-help tax measure, apparently AB 1223 is looking that a portion of those new revenues from the tax measure could go to fund programs like this. So there's another tranche that potentially is a revenue source. So that's kind of the comments that I would put out there is make sure that the money that needs to go to the functions that we have to do stay there. But certainly there's a lot of benefit to this program. And then the last thing I would ask is, selfishly, given that I wasn't here when this was put into place, there is a portion of my district called Rosemont that has a very short aging commercial corridor that I think would be a prime candidate for a pilot study. Is there a way to revise the locally adopted Green Means Go catchment area?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, those are intended to be living areas. So yeah, we'd be happy to follow up with you and your staff just to think through how we can make an amendment to it.
Right
So
on.
yeah, definitely not in stone.
Thank you, Chair.
Director Kozlowski.
I'm just gonna renew my suggestion that we volunteer to do a vehicle miles travel trade for gas tax. And we do it as a no net loss program with an exception that we gather the funding that's necessary for Green Means Go to continue regionally. And maybe we, that is like completely flipping the script, but we could solve several problems by making that transition and also create a permanent funding source for Green Means Go type development projects.
All right, that's it. Any further questions? I'd like to thank all the committee members for their comments. We're gonna move on to the next item, information item number 3, draft of 2025 blueprint and environmental impact report status update. Lisa Lynn, SACOG staff, is that the item?
Good afternoon, Chair Banks, committee members. My name is Lisa Lind. I'm a new principal planner at SACOG. I joined the planning and programming team in March, and I've been engaged in Blueprint ever since. So I'm pleased that my first time before you today is to give you an update on what we consider to be both an exciting and really important program and project for the region. Thanks, James. So today's update is intended to be brief. We really want to just take a few moments to highlight where we are in the process, let you know what we've been working on this summer, and then look ahead to the fall schedule for when the blueprint is scheduled to be finalized. In our communication about the 2025 blueprint, we've stressed the triple bottom line for co-equal goals as a framework to guide the region towards a bright future, healthy environment, and prosperous economy. And building on the recommendations for the land use and transportation to accommodate our region's growth, we've gathered an input on what that growth may look like. This was a focused and consistent effort on outreach to local agencies, the public, and our key partners, hearing about the importance of access, housing options, including affordability as some of the top concerns, followed by investing in existing communities. And these and other key themes have informed the policies, the strategies, and the programs in the 2025 blueprint. So now to report in on the recent progress since we were at your May committee meeting. This spring, the committee helped shape the specific plan policies, and our outreach and interest in hearing more about what others thought of those policies continued into our tour of the region with presentations at your cities and counties. And then we worked to prepare and put together the draft plan. The board approved the release of the draft plan for 2 months of public review and comment in the beginning of June. And the plan is posted on SACOG's website with the accompanying environmental impact report, or EIR. And then we held 3 virtual and in-person open houses to encourage the community members to learn more and provide input. We displayed some of the boards near the window that were from one of those open houses, just to sort of highlight the plan and how it's coming together. And so during this time, we're taking comments through the mail, email, and online. And then tomorrow, which is August 8th, is going to be the end of the public review period. And all the comments we receive are going to be reviewed, and we'll include them in the final EIR. Preparing the draft blueprint has provided this opportunity for us to summarize what we've heard and what we've learned. That includes housing trends and needs, transportation options that work for a diverse region, and the realities about the costs of infrastructure, to name a few of the concerns and priorities for our local jurisdictions. And these themes are carried forward and reflected in the 4 strategic priorities in the plan. They provide the structure for the policies as well as the implementation actions to build vibrant and inclusive places, foster the next generation of mobility solutions and the way we plan for infrastructure, the way we pay for infrastructure, and then also maintain a safe and resilient transportation network. The strategies are reinforced through the examples in the plan of how your local agencies and partners can turn these policies into action. So to address land use, the plan calls for most of the housing and employment growth to be in existing areas. And it envisions the revitalization of the region's green zones, which you just heard about, as well as the suburban and rural communities. And as you heard in the previous presentation and at lunch, there is encouraging news with recent permitting trends and increased housing options. And when the jobs and the services you need are closer together and there are more options about how to reach those destinations, residents can spend less time driving in a car. So on the transportation side, the 2025 blueprint is about prioritizing maintenance and repair, as well as projects that continue to make it safe to get around and reduce congestion. So coming into 2025, there was considerable outreach, analysis, and input to build the draft plan. Combined with the comments from the public review period, we're working now to bring the plan to the board for approval this fall. Oops, sorry, too much. So to wrap up today's presentation on our timeline slide, we're looking ahead to September and October when we're going to bring a summary of the feedback to this committee and also review any of the requested changes and plan revisions. And then the board can consider an action to adopt the 2025 blueprint, and that will include certifying the final EIR. So with this milestone in sight, I just wanted to end by saying we're just really encouraged that this plan is coming together in a way that it reflects the region, the input from the region, and also really sets us up to work together to implement the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from public?
There's no public comment.
All right. Any questions or comments from committee? Director Villegas?
Quick question. Well, congratulations. Welcome, Lisa. In terms of the public comment, have there been many, or I'm just curious if you could summarize what the essence of them are, or has there been any at all, or do you know?
Yes, happy to summarize. So we have received several comments via email, and some are sort of uploaded to SequinNet. We are hearing from state agencies, we are hearing from some of our local partners, and we're hearing from community members. I would say that overall, the public comment period, as far as written comments, has been a little bit light. I do expect, though, that that will change today and tomorrow. We do know that it really is that deadline that spurs most people to get their comments in. So that could easily double by tomorrow at this time. And I think that's going to be what we want to report back to you at the September meeting, is where we heard from comments and what some of those themes were and our plan to address them.
Yeah, no, again, friendly reminder to all committee members, make sure you let your staff know that tomorrow is the last day to get their comments in, right? Going once, twice. Tomorrow by 5 o'clock will be closed. All right.
One particularly just important comment we did receive, or letter we did receive, just relevant to Yolo County in particular in West Sacramento, is the Delta Stewardship Council does need to review our plan for consistency with the Delta Protection Act. And they did do that, and they found that this plan is not, it's a funny way of saying it, this plan is not inconsistent with the Delta Protection Act. So we got that letter, and we can move forward on that front.
I served on that committee for a couple of years. That was difficult to say.
Yeah.
Yes. Congratulations, you are not inconsistent.
All right, the next item.
Didn't you mean to say you didn't not serve on that committee?
No, I didn't.
Okay, next item is information item number 4, update on the federal revocation of California's vehicle emission standards. That Holson?
Yeah, okay, so this is a fun one. And I will try to make this pretty brief and simple. And it does very much pertain to the adoption schedule for the 2025 blueprint. So over the summer, in June, Congress passed 3 resolutions that effectively nullify some waivers that California depends on for Clean Air Act, Federal Clean Air Act compliance. California has a unique position in the country where the state will set more stringent standards for vehicles and engines and things like that that are required under federal law. And generally those have been approved, but these resolutions basically remove that ability. What that means for us, for the state of California, and then for our region, is it puts the state into what is called a air quality conformity lockdown. That sounds really bad. It does have implications, but we've got some mitigation in place at SACOG that actually will help us navigate this. So essentially what these resolutions do is they remove 3 key strategies that California uses to try to meet federal Clean Air Act's clean air standards. They're called National Ambient Air Quality Standards. One of those in particular is what affects SACOG, the Advanced Clean Cars 2 initiative. This is the initiative in California to have new vehicles by 2035 be zero emission. Those assumptions are baked into the frameworks that MPOs are required to use in determining whether our plans and our program, the MTIP, it's kind of the near-term projects, that their implementation will still allow us to meet the Clean Air Act kind of milestone or emissions targets over time. When you remove those, we now do not have an emissions model that is approved by EPA that has the current standards in it. So what that means, the conformity lockdown that creates means that there can be no new federal approvals of plans and programs like our 2025 blueprint until either there is a court ruling that gives some additional guidance or allows us to use that model until some further decision, or the Air Resources Board develops the new assumptions and plugs them into the new model, and then that needs to go through an EPA approval process. And so that could take some time to do that. The kind of silver lining, bright side, the things that we've got in place here is in 2023, this board did adopt a major new amendment to our long range plan, which essentially reset the clock on our federal plan. So we have a federal plan in place until 2027. All of the projects in that plan can move forward. There are limitations to the types of amendments that you can do to those projects. So if you're trying to advance a project, a capacity increasing project, a road or highway expansion project, a transit expansion project that would trigger additional air quality conformity analysis, we would not be able to make those changes. There's a lot of projects that can absolutely move through. There are projects that are called exempt. These are all your maintenance projects, whether they're funded with locally funded funds, state funds, federal funds, those can all move forward. Operations projects can move forward. There's a lot that can move forward. But it restricts, can you change the scope on a highway or an arterial project? There's limitations on the scope changes. There's limitations on the magnitude of funding changes or the completion year. We are reaching out to local staff, project managers, DOT representatives to make sure that they're aware of this. The fact that we did do this major update in 2023, and then we maintain the near-term list of projects in our transportation improvement program on a monthly basis. And so we've cleared the decks of a lot of the needed changes already. So as we're reaching out to local agencies, they understand, yes, there's going to be some heartburn the longer this runs on, but at the moment, no projects are grinding to a halt. They are able to keep moving forward. And our programming team is in active conversations with anybody who could potentially have a risk. The longer this goes, the risks get worse. So I said, as I said, we have until 2027, we have a federally approved plan. We can fully implement that plan. We can't get federal approval on the 2025 blueprint, but we do think it's still important to go ahead and advance that plan, approve it, certify the EIR for a couple of reasons. One is we want the state to review it for consistency with SB 375. So adopting it, getting the state doing that, that keeps us eligible for state funding, SB 1 funding. Also, it makes us ready as soon as there is a solution, whether that solution comes out of EPA with additional guidance, something out of the lawsuit, or something out of CARB with some sort of a patch to the that they can make to the emissions model. We can retest our emissions if we need to, and then get that submitted for federal approval immediately, so that any projects that are waiting for an amendment can go ahead and get that amendment in and move forward. So for right now, we're having, there's lots of different ways that we can help project sponsors advance projects. So we're encouraging them as we reach out. If they have any questions, please do follow up with us as soon as possible, just so that we can start kind of strategizing where we can be helpful and what we can do to make sure these things are not delayed. But again, the longer this goes on, the higher the risk becomes. If we don't have a solution by 2027, you fall into what's called a conformity lapse, which further limits the kind of changes you can make to your long range plan. But that's a little ways out there. So I'll stop there. I know it's a lot and it's a fairly complicated process. So any questions that I can answer, I will do my best.
Is there any, anyone from anyone from the public that has any comments, or any questions at this time?
There's no public comment.
All right, bring it back to the committee.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my first question is, I'm a little confused because I was always under the impression that we could not use electrification of the fleet towards our air attainment goals.
Greenhouse gas.
Green-
So for under SB 375, the state has multiple tranches they're trying to do. Some of it is the vehicle technology, zero emissions vehicles. And they limit, because of that, they limit how much they want MPOs to take credit for that. So what they're wanting out of regions and MPOs is VMT reduction. And then the state says, and we have the strategy on the zero emissions, so we get most of the credit there. We do take some credit for zero emission vehicles here, where our region has programs in place that would exceed the rate of adoption of new vehicles and the deployment of infrastructure for those vehicles beyond the state program. So we do take a small amount. For air quality conformity, it's absolutely part of the solution. So when we're doing our modeling to look at, are we in attainment in all of these future target years, there is both the VMT equation, how much people driving, but all of those California regulations, the primarily advanced clean cars too, is built into the software. So it is part of how we achieve our federal Clean Air Act attainment. So there's just a parsing out a difference between SB 375. They're saying the EV should not be a big part of your strategy, but absolutely, if you're accelerating it past the state, take some credit for it. On the clean air side, they want, it's kind of all hands on deck, everything that we can do to meet the federal standards.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then my other question is, in reading the staff, or the agenda, it says the joint resolutions nullifying California's ability to establish separate vehicle emission standards that go beyond federal requirements. In other words, a loosening of the standards.
Yeah.
How is it that a loosening of the standards throws us into such disarray that now our plan is so far out of compliance that we can't modify any projects? I mean, I love it because it sounds like we're doing fix it first for the next 2 years, which is okay by me.
It's a good question. So, and hopefully I can address it clearly. The nullification removes 3 of California's strategies to achieve clean air targets. The national ambient air quality standards that we're held to, so the quality of the air we breathe, those did not move. So we still have to meet the same standard for clean air, but they've removed 3 of the strategies by which we get there. So you have to insert either new strategies to get additional reductions to get to the same air quality. That could happen in a couple of ways. There's the SACOG obviously deals with more the transportation side, but there is a state implementation plan that looks at how are we achieving these overarching air quality goals. And that has reductions that come out of business, out of manufacturing, out of the smokestacks, and out of transportation. California decided we're not taking more out of business and smokestacks and things. We don't have a ton of space that we want to take there. So we're taking it out of transportation. Therefore, we're going to have more strict standards on vehicle controls, on the emission controls on vehicles. So removing those allows, or brings to California a choice. Do you want to take it more out of additional VMT reduction? So still getting it out of the passenger vehicle side, or are you going to get it out of other places like your manufacturing and smokestacks? That is something that they would have to decide down the line. I think in the meantime, we at least want a new MFAC version to say, okay, can we meet conformity with the federal standards? Is our plan good enough to meet those conformity targets even without these strategies? And we need a new emissions model to be able to demonstrate that. Is
That was my question.
clear but frustrating? Hopefully. Okay.
Were we trying to overshoot the federal standards already?
We have some headspace, particularly as you move later into the plan where you're seeing more benefit. It's earlier in the years of the plan, particularly around things like particulate matter, where there's just less headspace, where we do depend more on technology than built environment change. It just takes a while for the built environment change to start really resulting in benefit.
All right. Any other questions from the committee?
Director Hume, I will say to your point on, we're just doing Fix It First the next couple of years to connect back to this morning's STIP funding allocation that the Transportation Committee approved, notwithstanding some other, things we were working through and will continue to work through. We did make a pretty explicit decision in the STIP funds to have what we call exempt projects only. Alberto Ayala calls this the no regrets strategy. We did not see this coming when we did that, but part of the benefit now of actually having that allocation is those are all air quality exempt projects, thankfully. So, because we would be in trouble if they weren't. So just, it's going to come back to the full board. It is Fix It First and a lot of maintenance, a lot of active transportation that is coming through the STIP funding that was just approved in advance by the Transportation Committee this morning. That there is a connection there.
All right. So I guess we've asked just for staff to continue to explore the item, right, bring it back in the future for more discussion at a later meeting, so.
Yeah, everything is still shifting. So as we learn anything new, we'll make sure we're bringing it back to this.
Sounds good. Other matters, anything that board members would like to discuss at this time? All right, well, this is the time any members of the board could provide updates or address issues, items that are not on the agenda. If there's no other questions or updates, then the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee meeting is now adjourned. The next lunar meeting will be on Thursday, September 14th, 2025, 1:30 PM here at the State Board.